the witch almost is the negative feminine image in our society, and what's happening is it's becoming more favourable. Like, it's been looked at as almost maybe something aspirational. When you start to look at the villains in the old fairy tales as being like, I quite like that person. There's probably, something's probably gone wrong with where you are right now. It's probably not that the old folk wisdom has gone out of whack.
If you go down to the woods today, you're sure to hear a very interesting conversation about meaning, the meaning crisis, faith, and popular culture. And in this video, I am joined by my good friend Ryan, and we're going to be talking about reclaiming Halloween. So Ryan, it's great to be with you again.
Yeah, amazing. Look where we are. It's amazing.
Yeah. So we are in this woodland. We thought it'd be a fitting location as the leaves turn and autumn comes, just to talk about Halloween. You've probably noticed wherever you are, whether you're in Britain or whether you're in North America, that the whole Halloween season's begun. The shop windows are covered with displays, some of them wholesome, some of them not so much. So I don't know, Ryan, do you want to kick us off with why we thought it'd be good to do this?
Yeah, I think obviously we've been trying to find, I think Halloween's a great point of connection between, it almost bridges both worlds almost quite perfectly really, because it's very popular in the modern world, in the modern culture, and people really get into the spirit of it. There's something about that I think that you've noticed and sort of brought to my attention.
Yeah. So I think it'd be interesting just to kind of lay the ground for this, because I've never thought about this. The word hallow in Halloween, and maybe I'm just a bit dim, but I think a lot of people, even people who've been Christians all their lives, actually totally miss that. Hallowed, sacred, saint. And if you think about the weekend, we have Halloween, which everyone's aware of, Hallow evening, hallowe'en, and then we have All Saints Day, so the day when the church celebrates all of the saints, known and unknown, some of them known only to God, so not just the famous people recognized as saints. And then after that, we have All Souls Day, so a day where we remember and pray for those that have gone before us. So we have this kind of, holy, we have two holy days, and then we have a day kind of before it, Halloween, which in a kind of post-Christian culture is sort of all that's left.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so it might be worth going into a bit of like the origins of Halloween, because I find this really interesting, especially the connection between, it seems like there was, all around the world, I found this really interesting looking into this last few weeks, but all around the world there seems to be this time of year, especially in the northern hemisphere, which is this time of year everything starts to die, the leaves go brown and orange, and death is kind of in the air, if you like, and it's the end of the harvest. And so the Celtic pagans had a festival called Samhain, which was pronounced like, it's spelled like Samhain, but it's spelled Samhain, it's pronounced Samhain, but it's basically to celebrate the end of the year. So that was almost seen as their like New Year's Eve. So they separated, the early Celtic pagans separated the year into two halves. So you had like the light half and the dark half. And this time of year, right now around Halloween, it's the end of the harvest and it's the end of the light half of the year. So it's kind of when you're just entering into the dark half of the year. So it's like a transitionary point, but this would have been seen as their new year. So the start of a new cycle. The old one had been completed with the harvest, and then that was that. And so it's almost like I was thinking about this a bit like a threshold in the calendar. So it was seen as this kind of transitionary period from one year to the next. So almost like a threshold, and like a threshold between a space between spaces, or like a liminal space, which I quite like this idea, because all over the world you see celebrations of this kind where there seems to be a bit of a universal idea that the barrier between the living and the spirit world, the living world and the spirit world, sort of gets thinner or more easily transferable. So you can go between these two worlds at this time of year. So Mexico have like the Day of the Dead, which falls exactly around the time of Halloween. I found out China has like something called the Month of the Hungry Ghost, which is a weird, kind of unusual sort of thing that I'd never heard of before. But all these sort of things take place around the same time of year, and it's quite it's easy to see why when it comes to the cycle of like the plants and the moving into sort of death. But it also definitely has like it's the time of year where you recognize death, because that's obviously a point of
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
And so it has to fall somewhere. You can't just ignore it.
Yeah.
And so it seems to fall around this time of year.
So this is an interesting point, that there's a kind of universal pattern almost, or this thing has kind of emerged almost universally across cultures, if I'm kind of catch your point.
Yeah, yeah.
And I suppose there's this wrestling within Christianity, within the church throughout history, whether or not that has any validity, whether or not we still recognize that. And I think with something like Halloween, so we have Halloween and then we have Hallow Mass, sometimes mostly called All Saints Day today, Hallow Mass, and then we have All Souls. And so these kind of holidays are pre-Reformation, still very much alive in the Catholic Church. But, you know, we're in Britain, certainly the West, Western Europe, North America kind of takes the lead more from Protestant culture, I suppose. So there's this tension whether or not we recognize those patterns still and what place they have. And if Christ, if the divine Logos can, as it were, baptize those patterns, can bring those patterns into, orient them towards something good.
Yes.
So it's not a kind of, 'cause one of the critiques I hear is that from certain religious people, certain Christians, is that Halloween is a kind of celebration of death. And certainly that's the way it's going. And I would argue, we've titled this video Reclaiming Halloween. I would argue, and many others smarter than me would argue, that that's because we've abandoned Halloween, which is a kind of folk celebration that exists. Like it's not been decided by the church that we do this and we do pumpkins and this is what we do and we must do this. It's emerged like fluted, like naturally from the ground up, like it's a folk holiday, you could say, and we've abandoned it. So I don't know how that speaks into your point that there's a universal pattern, because I'm with you that has a validity. And I think you see in the history of Christianity, which a lot of people don't know about, is that the church didn't just reject the local culture.
Yeah.
In a way, it baptized it, it drew it in, it drew it up towards Christ, and kept what was good.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, especially because you see something that I've been thinking about a little bit. Gargoyles are something which are monstrous, kind of, they almost look evil. There's this tilt towards something frightening, and then through the church, they're transformed. They're given a purpose in the church, put in its proper place on the outside of the church to guard, because they exist on the fringe of the church, but they act as this, like, it's like a transformation of these evil, nasty looking things that if you walked into the church and there was a giant one at the front of the church, you'd be really concerned, because it'd make no sense why this thing was in there. But the fact that they're on the outside and they're, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the rock and roll thing where people make the sort of hand sign of the like to ward off evil.
Yeah.
And we do the same thing in Halloween with pumpkins, obviously, as gargoyles do. They play like little gargoyles of our house, where we make these monsters, put them outside, and the purpose is to keep out evil. And I think that there's something about that which we can engage with, although we have to be careful with it, I think, because there is a snake in the garden, and so to try to completely have this space that contains no death almost, or no sin, is just unattainable. It's not the real world. The real world does contain this element.
Yeah, I've heard Jonathan Pajot, and many of you might have stumbled on this channel and what we're doing because of Jonathan Pajot over in Canada, and he does all the symbolism and a kind of deeper look into all these things. And I've heard him say that symbols, so let's say the jack-o'-lantern or a gargoyle, they're almost, would it be amoral? They're not necessarily, we see them in a very moralistic way now. We see them in a very dualistic way. That, for example, a gargoyle, something scary is always bad. Like a snake is always bad. You know, I'm not talking in terms of like conserving nature and things. There are probably snakes in this forest. You know, I'm not on about like the modern frame where people are like, no, we must protect wildlife. I'm on about the symbol of a snake is always bad. But it depends on the context. It depends on where it's placed. Like sometimes you would see in medieval societies, you would see a dragon on a helmet.
Yeah.
To give strength to that person. That doesn't necessarily mean they're fighting for dragons. And especially if they're a Christian, they're going to be aware of the image of a dragon in Revelation. You said the snake in the Garden of Eden. So they know that it has this darker side, but they're not necessarily, in a way, they're using it for a different purpose.
Yeah, like as wise as serpents, as innocent as doves.
Yeah, exactly. As Christ says, be as wise as, exactly. That's a great point. And I think the challenge that we've got is wherever you are with this, and we have, I think, people coming from different perspectives watching these videos, which is great. But for the people who've kind of been raised as Christians, maybe in a more Protestant kind of culture, just run a mile from Halloween. And in a way, it's kind of abdicating our responsibility to engage with death, to engage with what's frightening. And it just seems like a golden opportunity to actually engage with something that does seem to have quite a lot of cultural purchase at the moment.
Yeah, there's like the pressure release valve that Jonathan Peugeot sometimes talks about, that Halloween acts as this little window, again, like a little threshold almost, a space between spaces where the pressure can get out, where people have these quite conformed lives, and people look forward to this day where they get to dress up like evil things or monsters or scary things, and kind of just, it's like the carnival. It's basically a form of carnival, I think, and it just allows people to let this pressure out, and then you go back. And I think there is some function to that, because you can't get rid of death, and you can't get rid of sin whilst we're here on earth. It's kind of a part of life.
And I think the point is as well, what we're kind of saying with this discussion is, you have to have, we laid the ground at the start with the other days. You have to have a day for the saints. You have to have a day for what is good, and you have to have a day to pray for, you could almost say, pray for what remains a mystery. Pray for something that's unsure. I don't know. My Uncle Jimmy wasn't a Christian. Where is he now?
Yeah.
That's, in a way, that's what All Souls Day is about, Without those other 2 days, then it is just a celebration of death. And that's what we're seeing in our culture, where it's unhinged. Like, I wouldn't have a problem. My kids are really little, a toddler and a baby. But let's say they wanted to dress up as something spooky for Halloween. I wouldn't have a problem with them dressing up as something, a bit spooky. But then it's like the limits that we put on that. And now we're just seeing it go out of all sense of decency. And like, it just seems to be, without the church being in that place, without Christians, without followers of Christ being in that space, the whole thing just seems to have gone crazy.
Yeah, there's almost like no conclusion to that problem. It's almost like Halloween presents this problem, and then the conclusion of that is All Saints Day and All Souls Day.
Yeah.
And it reminds me a little bit, I was thinking about this the other day, that our culture is very good at stripping out the sacrificial parts of these holidays and keeping the consumerism and the vapid parts of them, like the sort of superficial. That we like Christmas, we like the presents, and we like the feasting and the parties. But we don't want to go through Lent. We don't want to go through the sort of Advent period in like a prayerful way, and we don't want to do that self-reflection. And it's the same with Lent and with Easter. Like, people like the eggs, and we like the Easter eggs. We love that. We love the pancakes. But we don't want, and it reminds me of, like, we don't want all the fasting and that sort of thing. And it's almost like, we're a culture that's obsessed with, like, eating only dessert but not the main course. Like, we don't want the nutrients, we just want this bit at the end.
That's great.
And we take every holiday and do that with it, where we're like, the meal, like, we don't have to have the meal, that we actually really like the dessert bit, so we'll just do that. But it's like, but of course there's consequences to these kind of things. If you just ate ice cream all the time, there'd be huge consequences to your health. And I think the culture is doing that exactly with all the holidays, which are obviously holy days, which we forget sometimes.
I think we forget all the time.
Yeah.
Especially in Britain, where it's just such a secular culture that we're in.
Yeah.
So I think really what we're kind of saying is, everything has its place. Everything has its place. Nothing, in a way, there is very little that is entirely taboo. There are some things that are obviously completely taboo, but when it comes to these fundamentals like life, death, they have to be properly ordered and properly, in their place. And the loss of Halloween, the loss of the kind of telos, the kind of purpose of Halloween, is we can now see it kind of spiraling out of control. But the light, the positive side to this, and what we hope to be doing in these conversations as we continue with our monthly meaning conversations, is actually looking at how we, at least in Britain, we begin to, like, breathe in a small local way, begin to breathe some goodness back into these things. Like, I can see that in a way it's as if Christ says, like, everything has its place so long as it's in him, so long as it's, but it's...
Yeah, it's like the universal image. the universal image must contain everything, because if it doesn't, then it's not a universal image. So it's like, it obviously death is a part of life. And it's interesting because the church does this with lots of things, like it has a way to incorporate the fact that we eat. We're animals, we have an animalistic nature and we have the spiritual nature, and the animalistic part of ourselves needs to eat, but it has a way of eating which is in the Eucharist. That's how we consume in the most reverent way we can. And it also, there's a similar thing that goes on, I think, with obviously marriage, with sex is a thing that animals do, but we have a way of making it, raising it up. So you take this like really based instinct, and you raise it up to the highest point. So the way that we eat in the Eucharist is the highest it can be. You can't eat anything, you can't consume or drink anything in a more reverential way than that.
Just to use the marriage example, and the kind of, like, as you say, the kind of full intimacy that marriage allows, it's not an end in itself.
Yes.
In Christian marriage, it's like Halloween at the moment is an end in itself.
Yes.
So it's destructive, and sex in marriage, if it's just an end in itself, if there's no possibility of children, which is a whole other discussion, it becomes destructive, which is what we're seeing in our culture, like a culture that's obsessed with sex almost without its proper purpose.
Yeah.
You know.
So Hallowtide, this time of year, like I think that kind of refers to like the block of time in which you've got Halloween, All Saints Day, and All Souls Day. That it almost is to death what a marriage is to sex. That it's like the container. It's a complete container that contains the concept of death. Like how do we interface with the gory and the obviously these things exist in reality, and we have to have a place for them. And the culture left without the whole container is almost like what's happening, like I said, in relationships, how you see this breakdown of the family unit, and then all of a sudden the animal instinct breaks wild, and that's happening with Halloween, with the whole death thing, and it's quite
and it does become, to give the kind of critics of Halloween, usually the Christian critics of Halloween, their due, it has spiraled into a worship of death. Like you see people dressed up like they've just been, like a scene from a horror, like a scene from The Shining or something. Like I saw an advert for sweets. It's a Haribo. It was a Haribo advert,
right?
And there were some kids dressed up as the girls from The Shining, the twins from The Shining.
Oh wow!
That's in this year's Haribo advert. So that's obviously appealing to the parents, because the parents have seen that film. Hopefully the kids have never seen The Shining. But it's so disturbing, because everyone probably knows it in the movie. You know, they've in this hotel, strange things happen. It's a Stephen King novel, and these kids have obviously been murdered in a horrible way, and their children. It's even more kind of disgusting. And so we're laying out the purpose of Halloween, of what Halloween can offer our culture, like a kind of meaning, a culture deep in the throes of a meaning crisis, quite a painful meaning crisis. We're laying out the kind of purpose for what Halloween could be. Is it worth kind of going into a little bit about how Halloween actually emerged?
So we'll look at the story of Stingy Jack, which was news to me. I actually had no idea until you mentioned it to me the other day. So you've got this old Irish story, so it comes from Ireland, of like a guy who's a Stingy Jack. He's this bad guy, not very friendly, very selfish, lives his life for himself, wreaking havoc everywhere he goes, a lot of lying and manipulating and that sort of thing. And then there's this, you can find various forms of this story where a few different things happen, but the theme is pretty similar, which is Satan hears about him, finds out how bad he is, and he's intrigued, he wants to meet him. He thinks no one could possibly be as bad as people are describing Stingy Jack, and then he goes up to Earth, meets him in a few various ways, and then Stingy Jack ends up somehow tricking the devil into basically backing him into a corner, usually using crucifixes or crosses to kind of capture the devil in these few various examples, and then he gets him to make him promises. And by the end of it, one of the things he's promised is that the devil will never take his soul. So eventually Stingy Jack dies, goes up to St. Peter at the gates of heaven, and finds that he can't get in because he's been a terrible guy all of his life, and he's sort of sent to hell. But then he finds he's rejected at the gates of hell as well, because Satan had promised him and gave him his word that he wouldn't take his soul. So he's then sort of stuck between worlds, which is interesting, because again it comes back to that idea of the threshold is like captured between these two extremes. On the way out of hell, Satan throws him an ember from the fires of hell, and he he can't carry it because it's too hot, so he basically hollows out a turnip, and that acts as the container that holds this ember, and then he just wanders between the worlds. He's sort of stuck in this between place.
Wow.
That's the story of Stingy Jack. They then came to call him Jack of the Lantern, which obviously changed into Jack-o'-lantern. And when the Irish immigrants moved to America, in I think it was like the 19th century, they took these stories with them, and they first encountered pumpkins for the first time, which only grew on that continent. So they was amazed to find that these are way better than turnips.
And then that's come back over to the British Isles and to Ireland and from the States. So that's really interesting.
Interestingly though, that means that the origins of the pumpkins are actually come from the post-Christian. So they're not like a pre-Christian tradition. And there's lots of these things in Halloween that I think a lot of Christians, especially if you're sort of squeamish about Halloween, I think you might miss some of these things, that it's like, that is a story about a guy trying to get one over on the devil and one over on God, and ultimately ending up trapped between them. And then we use the pumpkins again like gargoyles on a church. This like, I think the word's apotropaic, which is like to ward off. It's basically an apotropaic device, I think, is what people describe them as. But there's one on the Durham Cathedral as well. On the door, remember the door knocker? So that acts as an apotropaic kind of door knocker, which is this, which is a really interesting thing. I don't know if you put an image on the screen, but it's pretty cool to look at.
Will do. I find it a very compelling story, and I know that, as always with these things, we're wrestling with kind of different worldviews, and there'll be a lot of Christians who hear that and they'll be like, oh, the story and going up to St. Peter and then to the devil, it's so like mythological, it has no place in the kind of, in kind of a more sophisticated Christianity. And I really, really think we need to change our view on that, and we really need to pay attention to these stories. And I've only come to pay attention to them because of the work of Jonathan Pageau, and there are others out there. There's so much in that. I feel like we could have a whole conversation just about that folk tale, and it is a folk tale, but we have to not throw the folk elements out of Christianity. And I think that's why we've been left with a kind of flattened out faith. Just to say quickly, like the Tom Holland point, the historian Tom Holland talks about a kind of Christianity needs to like rediscover its weirdness, its strangeness. A man who's crucified, and there he is on the cross. He's hanging. We're looking down at a sculpture of him hanging on a cross, like we're eating his body and drinking his blood. Is already a very strange religion, but we just flattened out all the other elements we could without losing the kind of basic, the creedal elements. But there's so much in that story, and it speaks of how reality actually works, or how we actually experience the world, rather than a kind of neat thing like the Stingy Jack character, like this person, as you kind of say, in this liminal space, the person that's in between worlds, the wanderer. And I think a lot of it is about having the humility to say, there is more here than I don't. Why is this endured? Why is this endured, and why has it emerged? And to have the humility to say, I won't throw it away, I'll keep it and see what happens. Christ says, you'll know a tree by its fruits. I love to pull that one out. You'll know a tree by its fruits. And in a way, if something bears fruit, if something is good, if something leads us towards the good, if something seems to work, to not throw it away, which is very countercultural to how we're so idealistic in like the modern Western world. We're so ideological, because idealism is not always a great thing. Like it can be, but it's not always a great thing. And we're so ideological, and we like to judge things and run through things and decide, right, that's way past its sell by date, I'm going to throw it out, even if it works. Very kind of Enlightenment problem, I suppose. And there's something in acting out these patterns, participating in this cultural event, which seems right. Like I've got a toddler. She's 2.5, and she, at the moment, she likes to open the back door, or she asks us to open the back door, and it's getting dark on a night, and she points outside and she says, I'm scared of the dark, I'm scared of dragons. But she opens the door and looks at the darkness, and it's like she knows out there are things to be afraid of. And there are things to be afraid of which could, sometimes she says, like, can the dragons get in the house?
Right.
And of course, some parents will just say, dragons don't exist, and that's a whole other debate you can have, but about what, how much you engage with children's imagination. But she's not heard, she's not watched scary films or anything yet. She's only 2.5. She knows about, as Jonathan Pageau were fond of quoting, as he would say, like, there's a way that reality works. There's a way that things unfold. There's a purpose behind everything. And these patterns are beyond what we can, they're almost intuitive. And
Yes.
it's intuitive to her. And so just the idea for me of carving a pumpkin with her and putting, not at 2 years old, but when she's older, and putting it outside makes sense. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
This thing of, there's a scary thing here, but here's another scary thing. And it's beyond the rational mind, because some Christians would say, well, I don't believe scary things can get inside.
No, I get it. I get that. There's also, so there is something about that it's interesting. We put them outside and then the trick-or-treating starts.
Yes.
And in a weird way, the scary thing kind of attracts the scary,
Yes.
attracts the monsters.
Yes.
But then it also kind of, they don't come in, they kind of stop at the door. And then there's this like, it's almost like, there's like a balance between the scary thing kind of attracting the monsters, but then also keeping them at bay. And obviously then the door becomes the threshold and they come to the door.
Yes.
And then you kind of, there's like a slight negotiation and then you leave.
Yeah.
You kind of make an offering. And
Yeah.
it is, and I
Yeah.
found out that there's an old English tradition called souling, which once the harvest had taken place,
Yeah.
all people would go round to the rich people and offer them prayers in return for bread.
Yes. I've heard of that.
And
Yeah.
so that's very tricky. I mean, so the people who, sometimes when you speak to people who are Christian, who don't like the idea of trick-or-treating,
Yeah.
I think like it's a Christian tradition. It's like what it was, it wasn't trick-or-treat. It's a bit more of a threat nowadays, but it used to be like a prayer for some food.
Yeah.
And that's kind of there's something wholesome about that.
The idea of recognize, I suppose what I'm trying to get out of the example of my daughter is, it's like her intuition tells her that there are things outside to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And of course there are. And then we're in a structure, whether it's a home,
Yes.
whether it's a
Yeah.
church, it's the fractal, right? And she's recognized there are things out there, but she wants to open the door to look at them.
Gaze into it, yeah.
To gaze into them and to look at them. And in a way, the pattern of Halloween, the pattern of trick-or-treating, even if it is a more of a folky thing and it's not quite as wholesome as the prayers, the example you gave about prayers, which is cool, but the folk element of the trick-or-treating is almost like saying, welcome the monster to the door, see it, give it something,
Send it away.
off you go.
Yeah.
Send it away. Something about that pattern just feels right.
Yeah, there's definitely something to it.
Like, we are afraid. There are things out there that are dangerous. There are things out there that are evil. There are things out there that scare us. Death scares us. St. Paul says, "Oh death, where is your sting? Oh grave, where is your victory?" But we still recognize death exists.
Yeah,
like we still
absolutely.
recognize, even as Christians, we ought not to. Be completely terrified by the face of death, because Christ overcome death. We still live in this world in which people do die and bad things do happen, and having a space to recognize that is,
In a symbolic way, the trick-or-treating is almost a demonstration of how, I know Jonathan Peugeot's talked about this, it's been on my mind, but how demons work. It's almost like monsters roam around in the dark, and like you said, on Halloween, your house becomes like an image of the self, and monsters approach you, but you don't let them in. That's the general rule. You never say, come into the kitchen, sit and eat with us. You say, no, here's something now. It's this image of the monsters coming up to you, and then you dealing with them and them sort of receding. And there's also, it's not really good or bad. It's just it's showing you how things work.
Yes.
So you can actually see how monsters work. And there's also this, again, back to the pumpkin, attracting as well as sort of repelling. You give kids sweets, and then more monsters see you give kids sweets, and then they're drawn to you. They're like, they've got sweets. They're negotiating with the monsters. And so it's almost like it's just showing you how, once you start appeasing, I think is the word Jonathan Peugeot uses, but like once you start trying to be like, okay, I'll give you this, and then other people come, and then it becomes like this thing where it's like, all of a sudden, all the demons, they know, if you start negotiating with them, they know that you're a demon or a monster negotiator.
and it's done in a spirit of play.
Yes.
When it's done right.
But that's what play does. It reveals like the way the world works in a way.
Yeah. It's done in a spirit of play. Exactly, it reveals the way the world works. And I love your example there of the house being like an image of the self. So that then we do this in a spirit of play. We do this with children who aren't, our children and children trick-or-treating who aren't obviously ready for the, to fully see the way the world works. But when it's properly done and done with an element of belief and faith, not just as kind of reductive Western materialists, when we're ready in life, we ought to be kind of using those analogies in a way and saying, yeah, remember how this scary thing comes and, but there's a way to ward it off. And I feel like there's so much wisdom in the medieval world.
Yeah.
But I think also there's something really interesting that we could talk about Halloween itself, because we neglect the other 2 days, because we neglect All Saints' Day and we neglect All Souls' Day, definitely. But it's worth just mentioning what that really means. Like, it's a day where we celebrate all of the saints, like all of the saints, and this notion, which we all feel, whether you're a Christian or not, we feel that evil exists, darkness exists. You might be a complete moral relativist, but you've probably not watched the video for this long if you are. So, but for most of us, we all know this darkness exists. We all feel this world isn't as it should be, that things are not properly oriented towards the good. So on All Saints' Day, we celebrate those who are oriented towards the good. We celebrate those who have followed in Christ's footsteps, those who are in heaven, in that other place beyond this one. We celebrate a victory of good over the forces of evil, like an ultimate victory of good over the forces of evil, in a sense. I mean, Easter obviously is the big one, but All Saints' Day allows that local participation. It allows us maybe to remember our own family members who, wherever you are on this, if you come with me that far and say that is what we're doing, and evil exists, and evil wants to lure us down to stay with it. It wants us to stay in the mire. Think of the story, the parable of the prodigal son. It wants the young son to kind of stay with the pigs, eating the pods, and not to return to his father, not to return to the light. If all that's so, then evil, darkness, Satan isn't happy about that. And so in a way, the eve of that day is a strange day, is a day for strangeness, is a day where that darkness is more active. And so you can see how that kind of emerges in the medieval culture where Halloween kind of originally sprung up.
Yeah, and what a story for the church to be telling about why Halloween is happening and how to respond to it.
Yeah.
That's something that you can participate in. It's like, yeah, sure, do the pumpkin thing and everything if you want, dress up, but then we stop and we sort of recognize the darkness, and then we come towards the saints, and we all that energy is focused still towards the dead, but it's the victory through death.
Yeah.
Well, through Christ and death.
Yeah.
Of the human race, essentially, over evil. Mm-hmm. And it's such a great way of tying it all together. But I do think that what we've said is right about. There's obviously this debate about, do you participate in Halloween as a Christian? And I know some Christians are absolutely fine with it. Some are absolutely against it. But I do think it's about balance and recognizing that you have to acknowledge evil, how much you participate in it, and obviously you don't want to do evil things, but how much you kind of give yourself to it is quite important. If you don't want to give all of yourself to it, and some people really get into it, like you said before, the culture seems to be getting more and more willing to participate with it. And you see, even all year round, like the emergence of, it seems to me like the emergence of things like ghost things, like the idea of like ghost hunting is dead popular amongst teenagers.
Yeah.
I actually, without realizing it, inadvertently attended a Samhain celebration when it was one Halloween, when I was sort of exploring my spirituality a bit, and I was checking out the pagans a bit, like the Path of Paul Kingsnorth. I had that sort of that sort of naturey pagan thing going on for a while, where I was sort of exploring, and I found they had this Halloween ceremony where everyone went to this little chapel, and
was that actually a Christian chapel, like an old Christian chapel?
It must have been an old Christian chapel, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It was, and that the imagery was very confusing, but it makes sense now looking back to be like, oh, I know what that was now.
So like the world is, I mean, this is the argument you often hear in this kind of niche space online of very intelligent people, admittedly, is that the world is being re-enchanted.
Yeah.
And it's there's a positive re-enchantment, the re-enchantment of the divine logos, of Christ and his saints. There's also the negative re-enchantment, which is, it's not to say that everyone who engages with this or explores this is evil, but it's like it's happening.
Oh, it's definitely
and do we
happening.
direct it towards the good? Do we direct it towards Christ, or do we allow it to be? See, I feel in a way like saying, people think this language is, you know, very superstitious and stuff, but that the devil has taken Halloween because we've abandoned it.
Yes.
And in a way, he'll
Yeah.
do the same with spirituality because we abandon it. He'll make it about the self. He'll make it about the ego. He'll make it about pride. He'll make it all about.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's exactly what's happening, and I know it because I kind of, when I first fell out of materialism and atheism, I immediately fell into like an what would you call it? Like a undefined spirituality.
Yeah.
That didn't really have any sort of definition to it. It was just spirituality for spirituality's sake, and that inevitably led me to like these pagan things, which is what I first found. And so that's what's happening. I think that paganism's appealing to the modern sensibilities because of the focus on the self, the focus on nature, obviously.
Yeah. Which is a good, like nature is a good.
Of course.
And even the self, you know, isn't completely bad. It feels like there are. You can hear that on the microphone, but it feels like there are strange monsters in these woods, folks.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so like these things are not necessarily bad in themselves. It's just, as we've been saying, like directing them towards something. I just had a thought though. You can still hear these monstrous voices. I just had this thought about saying about how we've abandoned Halloween. Look at what's happening in culture around like the image of the cross, the image of like monastics, like especially nuns, not monks for some reason, but nuns, how they're turned into something evil, how they're turned into something dark in horror films. The cross itself is this symbol of. When I see a cross, I think of this light. You know, there's some light kind of coming in through the trees here. But you know, I'm a Christian now. But like our culture, these are disembodied symbols. They kind of lost their telos, their purpose. For most people in secular Britain. And in a way, the darkness, evil, the devil, it just fills that void with death, basically. Like, you know, I know of some nuns. They're wonderful people. Like, it's just so strange to see that thing is connected with like blood and darkness and death. It's such an inversion of something that's good.
Yeah, it really is. I think if once the culture's kind of had out of our collective mind, we've almost lost the idea of what the cross means, and like I said, what nuns and that sort of thing mean. And even like a graveyard is like a place of rest next to a church. It's kind of like
rest in peace.
Yeah. But the idea of even rest in peace, the word is used like as like a ooh,
rest in peace. It's like it's all this peace, hallowed evening, hallowed evening. Let's all dress up with like monster horns.
But those things can't be scary unless the meaning is gone. Like if you show me a cross even in a horror film, it's like, oh, at least they're glorifying Jesus and the fact that we're all saved from eternal damnation is being represented in this horror film. But it's not used like that. It's used like a fear device. Almost like you've got like, it's almost like it's gone back to its original purpose. Like, look, a torture device, and everyone's like, oh. It's almost like it's.
You know, that's a really good intuition because it is like a torture device because in the modern frame, the modern secular. I'm not saying everyone that's secular is like this, but the kind of right-on secularism, the right-on kind of atheism, religious is seen as an oppressive thing. And so the darkness, you know, I believe this whole like darkness that exists, these dark principalities, using this in the horror movies and everything to say, and nuns as well. That's the thing about nuns, isn't it? It's like oppressed femininity. So it's like controlled, the woman who controls herself. Of course, they would say controlled by an institution that's, you know, done all these bad things, forgetting all the immensely good things, the way that Christianity has remade the world. So it's funny because it is shown as like, ooh, religion is a scary thing again.
It's almost like taking on the meaning of the like loss of meaning in a weird way, or like this pre-Christian. So on nuns, I'm going to use it a bit to transition a little bit, but I was thinking about the symbolism for this talk of witches. And because I think that's, when you think of Halloween, that's one of the images that is definitely associated with Halloween. And so I thought I'll go into maybe explain a bit why, see if I can find anything out that I didn't know. So I've looked into it a little bit, and I did think at one point that nuns and witches are definitely, there's definitely a parallel between them, but one of them serving upwards in like a sacrificial way, like sacrificing, having certain things from life, like like husbands and families and that sort of thing in order to serve the Most High thing, God.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
And
witches,
to pray for others as well.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
what
and
monastics do. They pray for like a whole community.
And sometimes we have a lot of them the idea of using the word mother towards nuns sometimes,
Yeah.
and they call each other sisters. There's like they sacrifice something, but they kind of play a role in many ways, in a way that like it's almost like they become mothers for us all in a sense. And then the witch is almost this opposite thing where she sacrifices. You never really hear of like the classical witch having a husband, so they kind of make the same kind of sacrifice, but instead of it being to serve something, it's more to manipulate and to gain power or to grow in power.
Serve themselves.
Yeah, and ultimately to serve Satan, I think, is like the idea. There's this connection that the service goes downwards rather than upwards. And so so I've thought about the fact that there's that connection. Witches in our culture, the idea of them, I think, has over the last few years has become way more favourable towards witches. Like we don't actually. The scary thing is we don't find them that scary anymore, which I think is fascinating, because when you look at what constitutes a witch. So I've been thinking of like some common, even just like from the collective imagination. Not looking too deeply what things are associated with witches. Children are afraid of witches. Like the witches typically would consume or be a danger to children. So there's this idea. There's also the idea of black cats, the broomstick and the cauldron, like the flying broom and the cauldron, and then the pointy hats. So I've been looking at like these kind of elements of it, and I found it really interesting when I was doing a bit of research about it. So obviously they're a danger to children. There's this like non-maternal element to witches, where they're not like warm and nurturing like a mother, but they're more like cold and, I don't know, usually represented like thin and spiky.
Bitter,
kind of.
yeah.
But yeah, just like the opposite of this like warm, loving. If anything, they prey on children. They don't nurture children. So it's like this opposite of the feminine, like the deep feminine sort of impulses that. Yeah. It's like this opposite image. The black cat. So this was quite funny because obviously at the moment there's a bit of a meme at the minute of this like the cat lady, the crazy cat lady, and I think the witch is like the original crazy cat lady. She's got this it's usually a black cat, and black cats are associated with bad luck. Like folklore of black cats is like this unlucky thing. I was thinking maybe there's something to the idea that the witch kind of befriends bad luck or becomes keeps bad luck as a pet almost. Like there's this like connection of the witch and bad luck kind of being coming as a pair. Yeah. And then there's the idea of the broom and the cauldron, which I didn't know this. As soon as I started thinking about this, all of a sudden I've read something and I was like, oh, of course that's what it is. But these are domestic items. So the broom and the cauldron is the cooking and cleaning of the wife, of the housewife. Like for thousands of years, those would have been the things that most women would have spent a lot of time using, a broom and a lot of time around a cooking pot, which is what a cauldron is basically. But the witch uses these things in kind of like a subversive way. So she actually uses the broom to gain a form of power, and she almost transcends its purpose. Yeah. So she takes the purpose of it and uses it for something else. Yeah. Same with the cauldron. Yeah. That you should make food in there in order to feed the family people. And to serve people food and to feed and nourish. And instead she uses it to make potions to twist reality to her will. Yeah. And it's the same with the broom, that's to clean a space and to kind of keep a home, essentially. It's to make things tidy and clean and orderly, and she uses it as a form of transportation, which I don't quite get. Well,
it's kind of flying around like a kind of chaotic thing, isn't it? Yeah. She's always cackling and flying around. Yeah. And she can control it, but it's like a chaotic thing. It's chaos to us, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. No, I think that's popped into my head. I think it's really interesting to put the nun and the witch, to see them as two kind of opposites, and the way that the nun is kind of degraded and criticised, and the way that the witch is kind of presented as something good, and we see it in like kind of fantasy shows and things at the moment. Obviously Harry Potter, but I think Harry Potter's a kind of unusual one because Rowling uses like other mythological stories and tropes in a kind of ordered way. Yeah. I think perhaps she just didn't fully, I mean, she's a brilliant writer, but I think perhaps she didn't fully grasp them. But I just want to say really quickly, while we're talking about these kind of patterns and the way that these kind of characteristics are presented with a witch and things, I can hear a voice that says, you know, witches are about women who've been oppressed. Like, I think I want to make the point that when we talk about these things, in its defense, we're not talking about like necessarily history or like, I don't know, the witch hunts where, you know, often innocent people were killed for being witches where they weren't. We're talking again about the way that these tropes present themselves. And some people might say, well, I want to use that trope as a form of liberation. Like, I want to use the broomstick to show I'm not going to clean the house and I'm liberated. But you can't get away from then a desire. You can't get away from the element of that character, the element of that trope, that character that turns away from children.
Yes.
You can't get away from that. Again, these patterns and the symbols of them are beyond our actual understanding. They're talking about the way the world actually works.
Yeah.
And it sounds quite arbitrary to say that, but if you celebrate, I don't know, holding up the broomstick and shaking it around and pretending to fly on it, as ridiculous as it sounds, metaphorically speaking, right? Liberated from keeping order within a home, which is a good thing. If you celebrate that, you'll probably end up turning against children.
Yeah, no, it fits perfectly. And let me give you the kicker. So this is the bit I figured out literally on the way to you. So the kicker of it all is the pointy hat. So have you got any idea where that comes from?
No, all I know about pointy hats is a lot of the witch hunt stuff happened like 1600s, and people used to wear pointy hats, so that's all I know.
Okay, so sort of 14th, 15th, 16th century.
So just say that again, someone screamed.
Yeah, it did. So the 14th, 15th and 16th, the 14th and 15th and 16th century, there would be...
There's some weird voices again, howling out. Okay.
This is hilarious. So there's these hats that come from 14th and 15th century Europe that are called hinens or hennins.
Okay.
So it's basically a tall pointy hat, and it would be worn by intelligent women basically and also nobles and sort of the aristocratic women. So they would wear these hats, and you'll sometimes see them with like a veil attached to it, like from the end of it. So you might see they're very medieval looking.
I've seen these in paintings, yeah.
Yeah, so that image is what they used for the witch, and I thought what an amazing image of, like, it's almost the Luciferian intellect that's almost just got too, it's almost gotten too powerful. Like the ideas of the liberated woman obviously come a lot from academic circles. That's kind of where a lot of these ideas come from. And I think that there's obviously a lot of merit in it, and there's a conversation to be had about that, and you can see why women have sort of strove to get out of that. But when I went to the pagan sort of group, when I was sort of involved in that, there was a lot of women there who happily accepted the term witch. They would happily describe themselves as a witch.
Yeah.
And it was really part of their identity. So they wouldn't be insulted that if someone was to say this person says that they're a witch, or they literally claim to be a witch. So I'm not accusing anybody, but they were all very intelligent women. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about that, and about the fact that it almost shows that the witch is, in the image of the witch, she's smart.
Yeah.
Like she's very clever.
And cunning.
She's cunning, that's the right word for it. Yeah, she's cunning. And I think all those elements come together to just create this like perfect, like I said, it's like the anti-nun almost, but they create like this perfect character that has terrified children for generations. But there's definitely something to all those elements that there's like the throwing off of the household. There's also the fact they live in the woods, which is quite unusual, but I think that's kind of to do with the fringe. Yeah, I'm going to hear one right now, but it's kind of to do with the fringe and like being unseen and out in, and also associated with nature as well, which probably ties into that as well, and animals.
Yeah.
But it's just an amazing like image, and I think it's very interesting that the culture's attitude towards witches is like changed.
And it's almost like it's something, even now as we're talking about it, I feel like it's hard to talk about because, okay, probably not to the people who are watching this video, but to the general, let's say to the general public, or let's say even to a kind of more liberal Christianity, it's really hard to talk about because people take the oppression of women, obviously it's a very kind of, it's an important issue, it's very impassioned, it's hard to just remove, like get out, take the emotions out of it and just talk about it. But we could talk about like tropes, character, like examples of like misplaced masculinity or misdirected masculinity or toxic masculinity. We could talk
Yeah,
about
yeah.
all that. We could talk about like the male like monster,
Yes.
like uncontrolled man. Like we could talk about Beauty and the Beast. We could talk about all these male examples.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we're right on it when we're talking about like a nun and a witch.
Yeah, it just blew my mind thinking about it. I was like, it fits perfect with the culture as it is. As you say, it's difficult to talk about, especially publicly and online, and obviously in a very because it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
The witch almost is the negative feminine image in our society, and what's happening is it's becoming more favourable. Like it's been looked at as almost maybe something aspirational.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think when the old fairy tales, when you start to look at the villains in the old fairy tales as being like, I quite like that person. There's probably something's probably gone wrong with the where you are right now. It's probably not that the old wisdom of the old folk wisdom has gone out of whack.
So I think just to kind of wrap this up, and for me, kind of going forward, I would really love to see people embracing Halloween, the evening before the Hallow Mass, the evening before All Saints Day. So the kind of answer to the darkness, which is the saint, and to be saintly, to aspire to be saints. And also to embrace the third day, which is All Souls Day, to kind of pray. You talked about the legend, the kind of folk story of Stingy Jack, to kind of pray for this over the uncertain space. So you've got the dark space, let's say, just to simplify it, the kind of dark space in Halloween, you've got the light in All Saints Day, and then you've got this kind of uncertainty where we pray for the souls that we're not sure about. We pray for their ultimate fate, ultimate destiny. And again, that's a whole other conversation there, because then you get into the conversation about purgatory in the Catholic tradition, Roman Catholic, Anglo-Catholic, or they don't have the term purgatory in Eastern Orthodoxy, but it's kind of seen as a time of waiting. Most Protestants would reject that. But again, I would make an appeal to what we talked about at the start, which is these patterns and the way that reality unfolds itself. I now spend a lot of time in churches, in English churches, and the number of people that come in a post-Christian culture and go up to the stand, and most churches have them, where candles are lit. And even though officially the Protestant element of the Church of England does not recognise purgatory, people come in and they light candles, and it's always for a loved one. It's always for a loved one. My own family, who are not practicing Christians, who've never picked up a Bible, they do that. Someone in my family, I won't name them, but that's dear to me, she'll go in and she'll always light a candle for her mother. And, you know, it's like, why? Because those people that we love have left us, and we hope they've, you know, we hope that they are somewhere good, you know, I would say in the presence of God, in the presence of the invisible God. But there's uncertainty there. And in a way, All Souls Day offers a little bit of comfort in that we just mark that, and we pray for that. You know, we shine a light on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's like everything has to have its place, and I think that is a human experience to wonder about what happened to them once they died, and where are they now? And I think that it's important for the church to have that space, like you said. It almost acts as a space between spaces in our calendar, which is perfect. It's like it's just one day where we think about those that might be between spaces, or we don't know where they are. So there's this uncertainty.
And what comes next in the calendar about that, to answer that, is Advent. Is waiting for the light. Is waiting for the light to come. So thanks for this conversation, Ryan. It's been a great conversation.
No, it's been great. Thank you.
And I hope that people have enjoyed this. Again, if you stuck to the end of the video, thank you. And we hope that these ideas that we've been passing along, that we've received from others as well, we hope that you'll pass them along, and we'll hope that you'll share this video, like the video. And if you want more of this kind of stuff, go on over to the website, subscribe, and join us. Join us at Disciples of the Divine Logos. This is not a church. It's not a replacement to church. This is a community of people and having conversations like this and helping to re-enchant the world.